My name is Daniel Atwell. I am 31 years old. I struggle with same-sex attraction, or I have same-sex attraction. And this is my wife. And we've been married for 7 years. We have 4-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, and then we have a 3-year-old girl. We had 3 kids in 16 months, so our life is pretty busy and crazy. As a young age, I knew that I was different. I couldn't connect, especially with other boys. And it was around 2nd grade that I realized that I struggled with having a relationship with other boys. And my interests were different than the other boys. And so from the very beginning, there was this disconnect and conflict that I was dealing with, both with the culture I was growing up in and within my own family and the relationships I had with my father and with my brothers. It wasn't until I was the age of 13 that was my first exposure to pornography. When I first viewed the pornography, it was this instant binding that happened. It was a couple years later that I had my first exposure to gay pornography. And again, I felt that same hook that pulled me in, as if it was an instantaneous addiction. It wasn't actually until my mission that it really started coming out. I went on my mission. I served in the Philippines. It's a wonderful place. I was really excited to go. I was the first in my family to go on a mission. When I got into the mission field, I'd only been in the mission field for a couple months. And I was with my trainer. And I experienced some sexual abuse by my trainer. I did not know that that's what was happening at the time. Finally, after one particular instance, I remember I sort of had like a breakdown. And I told my trainer, I said, we've got to go to the mission president about this. I told him it was both of us that were participating in this, and because that's how I saw it. And by some miracle, he didn't send me home. He allowed me to stay on my mission. And then I came home from my mission, and it was about a couple months after my mission that I once again viewed pornography, and that was a huge crash. And it was this massive spiral for me, downward spiral. And from then, my pornography use just exponentially increased. I went and talked to my bishop. And that was the first time in my life that I not only openly acknowledged my pornography addiction, but I also acknowledged my same-sex attraction. The bishop, he was an incredible man. And he expressed so much love and so much interest in me and wanting to help. And so for the next 3 months, I had this incredible experience with him and him helping me out.
I grew up in California, and very quickly I learned that I love gay men, or boys. I felt so comfortable around them. And so I just always felt this connection with them. And I remember thinking at a young age that it was even possible. I didn't think it was possible I could marry someone like that. I had received my patriarchal blessing at the time that he was on his mission. And I remember feeling very strongly, it wasn't said in my blessing, but I remember feeling very strongly that my husband was on his mission at that time. It was around the time that I had come out to that bishop, and he was helping me work through this stuff and start a recovery process. He had called me to be his executive secretary, which was a shock. And when I was set apart for that calling, the high councilman that set me apart, in that calling, he said, your wife is here on campus, and you will find her. And that was huge shock, because I wanted to get married, and I just desperately wanted to have an eternal marriage and a family. I didn't think that I would have that, though. And he said that, and then after the blessing was over, it was quiet for a second, and then he said, I usually don't say things like that in a blessing when I'm setting people apart, but I felt very strongly that I needed to say that in your blessing. I had 3 months where things were going really, really well, and then I made the mistake of moving to a new apartment.
and I moved into a new ward. I didn't go to my next bishop and tell him what was going on. The fear had completely taken over again. And it was in that time where depression and anxiety really took over, and I was in a dark place. And that was actually the first time it had advanced. My addiction had advanced to the point where I acted out with a man for the first time. There was a weekend before we met. I remember that weekend. I was in a place of anger and frustration and shame. And I remember thinking, I'm done. I'm done trying. I am done trying to get married. I am done trying to date. And I'm giving up. And that was just a week, literally a week later, is when I met Emma.
Mm-hmm. So at that same time when he was feeling those feelings of anger and he was done, I was having my own struggles. I got in a really dark place. And it was not the Spirit, it was not by any means the Holy Ghost warning me or anything like that. It was evil, it was dark. So that next day, I'm sitting in sacrament meeting. They announced that the bishop is not there that Sunday. And so I thought, oh, great. So I just went ahead on to my meetings after sacrament meeting. And in Relief Society, they wanted us to say our names and what we are looking for in a future spouse. I said, what I would love is someone who, they call them the femi guys. I want someone who is in touch with their emotions and who can be my best friend. Two of his friends from his dance classes were sitting in that Relief Society, and they immediately turned to each other and said, Daniel.
They came to me like the next day. It was like Monday, and they came to class, and I was on the dance company with them, and they were like, hey, there's this girl in our ward. She talked about like what she like wanted in a spouse, and like she basically described you. And so they're like, well, we got her number, so here's her number. You should contact her. And I was like, okay. So we decided to meet the next day. I remember when she opened the door, I immediately felt something different that I had not felt before. This is the first time that when I sat down with a woman and talked to her, that it felt comfortable and it felt natural. I walked away from her apartment and I left, and I felt excited, an excitement that I hadn't felt before. We got engaged and it was great. It wasn't until she left, because she went and lived with her sister in Washington and I stayed at school. And it was in those 2 months that I started acting out again, and it got really, really bad again. I was so afraid that telling her would equal to losing her. And I could. That's not something I could do. I didn't tell her, and I went on with the plans. We got married, and for the next 2 years, we had some really great moments. Found out we were having twins.
It's one of the many moments of our life when we realize the Lord is in charge, and we just have to sit back and watch the miracles unfold because we can't do it on our own.
It was while she was pregnant with the twins, and it was while she was gone that I acted out with a man, and it was the first time while we were married that I acted out with another man. And I knew that I had two choices here. My two choices were, I've got to come out and tell her or not. And so I didn't. But God and Emma interfered.
I felt strongly one day to look at his computer, and I looked at the history and I saw everything that was on there, all the pornography sites and other things. And my heart just completely sunk.
That night she approached me and she told me what she had found on my computer, and I denied it. And it wasn't until she looked at me and she said, "Okay, Daniel," and she stood up and started to walk away, that I said, "Okay, yes, I admitted to my pornography addiction. I admitted to my SSA. But that's all I admitted to.
As shocking and scary as it was, it didn't matter to me. It did take me some time to digest, and it wasn't until the next morning that I felt like empowered, like, okay, we can do this.
The next day, we set up an appointment with the bishop to go talk to him about it. And the one detail I had left out was that I had acted out with other men. I sat down and I told her everything. And I told her that I had been with other men while we were married and engaged. And I remembered we were standing in our apartment, and all I remember is her sitting there and 2 tears rolling down her face. And the first thing that came out of her mouth was, "God hates me." And ironically, in that moment, we were both feeling the same thing, that we had been abandoned by God.
And during this time, we were desperately trying to find someone, anyone who had been through anything similar. Just within a couple days of all this coming out with the bishop and everything, there was light. There was a light in our relationship that had never been there before. But we had finally let the Savior in, and all of his walls were down. I knew everything now. We finally felt like we knew each other.
And I had this dream one night. And in this dream, I was standing at the front doors of the winter quarters temple. And then I turned around and Emma was running toward me. And she was like, "Okay, I'm ready." And we went into the temple. That dream was really carried me, and I feel like us, through, because I didn't feel like it was a dream. I felt like it was real. It was something that we could have.
The next month, he was brought back into full fellowship, and he was able to give her a blessing. And then we were able to go to the temple together for the first time in a year. And we were walking up to the temple, and that's when that dream played out. And it was just
like, it literally played out like that. It was a winter quarters temple.
We're in a much better place at this point, and I'm looking online for resources because I know they've got to be out there. And we found some addiction recovery places that seemed really great for us in Utah. So we started to make plans to come back, or to come out to Utah.
So we found a job, and by some miracle they hired me, and we moved out here. And we found out about Voices of Hope, and that's how we found out about North Star.
Figuring out the SSA has been kind of the close to it. I mean, we still have a lot to work on, but it's been where the real healing has started to happen.
I truly believe the promise that is made, that the atonement can change the very nature of a person. Now, I'm not talking about SSA. I'm not talking about the atonement changing that. But I'm talking about changing who we are as a disciple on that journey, and turning us into who he wants us to be.